We should be on. Yeah. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Enoy Adeseli Brown at the Open Center. And if you have currently been to our website, you'll see that we have a new website at www.opencenter.org. We're still working on it, so please give us some feedback. We'd love to know what you think. And you can write to marketing@opencenter.org. Also know that we have a full new season of programs coming up, and they'll be posted all the way through January. October events include Deepak Chopra's new book, and you will be seeing him with us on October the 3rd. And we also have the Esoteric Quest Conference. Since we weren't able to get to Portugal this year, we are still having a conference online. So I think you'll love that, and especially our teachers from around the globe. And also right after that, we're going to have the Art of Dying conference, which is about 2 days. That may not be posted. We're in the process of doing that now. And just keep coming back, and you'll be seeing a whole new world as you do that. So now I would like to introduce today's guest, Andrew Holecek. And I want to just give you a little bit more about him. And this is what I want to say. Andrew was introduced to meditation as a young man, and at the time he achieved states of consciousness that he didn't know existed. In an effort to understand his breakthrough experience, he spent several years pursuing different spiritual traditions and the study of different sciences, biology, physics, psychology. He even became a dental surgeon, following in his family's chosen profession. It was only until he discovered Buddhism that he found answers to his questions and became a Tibetan Buddhist. He received many of his teachings from the great masters and traveled to Nepal, India, Bhutan, Tibet. Now, Buddhism transformed his life, and ever since he's dedicated his work to helping others struggling on their path to spiritual awakening. Andrew has become an authority on meditation and on lucid dreaming, dream yoga, and the bardos. He is an author of several books on these topics, and his work has appeared in Parabola, Lion's Roar, Tricycle, Utney Reader, and many other periodicals. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Araceli. Thanks for having me. It's a delight to spend some time with you.
Oh, it's lovely. I love your background, and I'm so glad that it works.
Yeah, no kidding, huh? Cosmic.
Yeah. So you're going to be teaching, of course, a great class with us coming up, and I think that's on September the 24th. And I'm sorry, forgive me, but you can definitely find it on our website. And I forgot to put this down, but I want to start out by asking you, to some of our audience, not always, they may not be completely aware of what the bardos are.
Sure.
Or what a bardo is. If
Right.
you could just clarify that for us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, bardo is a Tibetan word, literally translates as something like gap, transitional process in between. It's getting a little bit of traction these days. Lincoln and the Bardos that experimental novel did really well. There's a couple other books now. It is archetypally a topic that's directed towards the end of life, but really the journey that we'll be taking in this course is Bardo principle has tremendous explanatory power. It basically refers to any situation that ends, and what doesn't, right? Everything.
Right.
So whether it's a end of a job, end of a relationship, end of a moment, end of a day, the fundamental notion is that if we become sensitized to this phenomena, to this principle, we will actually start to detect bardos are absolutely everywhere. And so what the Tibetan Buddhist tradition does really quite eloquently is it works with the small bardos, the small endings, the small deaths that happen every day, as a way to really prepare for the big one at the end of life. And therefore it has tremendous applicability. It's not just this wild kind of esoteric topic. it's really something that you can use to help you transition gracefully out of any situation. And because you can't have endings without beginnings, it's equally about beginnings. So it's a multivalent term that has tremendous applicability really across all dimensions of reality, spiritual applications, psychological applications, and even scientific. I mean, when you talk about in physics, quantum means basically, right, gap.
Hmm.
So it's related to quantum theory, it's related to neuroscientific tenets of perception. So it has a lot of traction, and that's in fact one of the things that I hope to point out to people is, bardos in everyday life. Okay, that's cool, but why should I bother?
Right.
Well, it can really just help you understand the phenomenology of transitional processes, sleeping, dreaming, dying, waking. And so usually when people have some experience with it, they go, oh my gosh, I had no idea there was so much explanatory prowess here. And so that's why I get excited sharing it with people, because it just has so much traction.
Well, I mean, basically, when I heard gaps, I thought, well, I'm not exactly sure what that means because, for example, when we talk about a relationship ending, sometimes people, yes, that happened, it ended, let's say it ended today, but do people actually become stuck in that moment?
Right.
And is that the gap where it's like, do I go to the next point? And it's like, if it's a trauma, you're stuck in that gap. That's the end of it. But how do I move?
That's exactly right. Yeah, people sometimes really just get a little bit disoriented, bewildered, because usually when things dissolve from underneath their feet, and here's something that's really worth throwing into the mix, Araceli, is that we are in a bardo right now. I mean, COVID-19, the social political upheaval, what this has done is this has pulled the rug out of our conventional reality. That's a bardo. And so this is an arena that I really explore in the upcoming course, is how can we use bardo principles to help us actually negotiate the current bardo that we're in. And so it can help you. It can help you let go. It can help you get comfortable with the unknown. How do you feel when you have the rug pulled out from underneath you? You slip on a piece of ice. How do you feel when you're sent flying? And there are psychological, spiritual tenets that can help you situate yourself, kind of maintain your bearings. And also, and here's the really great thing, transform obstacle into opportunity. And so there's kind of an alchemical principle that underlies Bardo tenets, that usually we think of endings most of the time as somewhat problematic or obstacle,
Right.
ending with the traditional things. And here, if we have a proper lens for what Bardos actually offer, you can in fact transform obstacle into opportunity. And for instance, with COVID, I mean, the snow globe has been shaken, right? How are the new patterns going to settle? Are we going to come back to the same old life? Will we in fact restructure our lives in a new direction, something that can be of greater benefit? So, when Humpty Dumpty hits the ground, it's not always in the best interest to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Sometimes let him go splat and then set your new lens in a new direction. So Bardos really provide that kind of opportunity for looking at things in a fresh, kind of growth-oriented light.
Because one of the things that, I mean, those are the big things that are happening. But then when I read that they're happening every day, one point was you're reading a book, and when you finish reading the book, you stop. And the next moment, when you move to the next point, that's a bardo right there, that little gap.
Correct.
And the idea that there is a way of actually getting into those gaps, and that we can actually address that, and I'm assuming through meditation.
Very much so. Yes, exactly. That's the implementation strategy. And I'm glad you brought that up, because what we will be doing in this course is setting the philosophy, the view, the outlook of the Bardo principle, what it means archetypally, how we can use it. But the real strength of the program we'll be offering are in fact these practices, these exercises, these contemplations, and what I playfully refer to as a number of so-called emergency meditations, right? Things we can use like right on the spot. Like for instance, just briefly, the extraordinary power of literally comes from the tradition, a one breath meditation session. One breath. That actually can ventilate, connecting to body and mind within the context of one breath, you're actually touching into a Bardo space that can then, interrupt the trajectory and momentum that may not be all that healthy. And the other thing, Araceli, that's really compelling is, again, it's Bardos, it's turtles all the way down, right? It's Bardos all the way down. And so when you really take a very close look at your mind and heart, that's part of what we'll be doing as well, there's actually a Bardo between each and every thought. I mean, our thoughts seem to be tailgating and jammed up against each other, but there's actually space between every single thought. This is what Vipassana insight meditation actually allows you to see. And so when you see this in your own meditation, first of all, it will help you identify the phenomenology of your own mind. And then you can actually see, in fact, you mentioned Deepak Chopra. Deepak Chopra famously says that, that space between your thoughts, recognize that, expand that. I mean, that's one of his central teachings. And so Bardo principles apply very much to the meditative process, how we can understand what happens when we see that space between the mind. Why is that helpful? Why is that important? And then, how can we use that literally with virtually everything we do? So once you're aware of these Bardo principles, you'll start to recognize them everywhere. And you'll also start to see that the developmental illusion we call ego is actually anti-Bardo. Ego is anti-Bardo. Ego doesn't like it when the rug gets pulled out because it lives on narrative, because it is a narrative. Ego is just a continuous storyline. And so this is also revelatory because it will show us why it is, well, why haven't I seen all these Bardos before? Well, it's because ego doesn't want to see them. It's antithetical to the kind of agenda of ego. And so understanding that will also help you understand the role of development and how that relates to psychological and spiritual growth. So as you're starting to see, this principle casts a very wide net.
Well, the core practices that you are going to work with were interesting to me because there are several of them, like you named them as Shamta, meditation to stabilize the mind, the one called open awareness, meditation to cultivate receptivity and equanimity, contemplations and emergency meditations, like one breath meditation, the complaint meditation, which is should be a popular one.
That's getting a lot of, yeah, exactly.
To stay embodied when you feel the urge to criticize, complain, or gossip. I mean, oh my God, that's like the everyday thing, especially in New York. And happiness contemplation, which is 2 to 3 contemplations on how to remain unconditionally happy. It's the first time I've heard that phrase. And yeah, I want you to tell me more about that in this respect.
Sure.
With the brain, especially because the brain, of course, is so complicated. It seems that there really has been such a genius in the Buddhist tradition, and to have figured out that so many areas of the brain work in different ways and have to be addressed in different ways. So they each have like their own particular language. It's almost like short memory, long-term memory. This part of the brain only remembers names, which I have trouble with sometimes, but the other one can tell the story about that person. So that's what I was getting from understanding that in order to really control or actually come to a clearer understanding of how we do this, because when we say meditation, most people feel like, okay, I'm going to meditate and it's going to take care of everything. It's just very generic.
Right. No kidding. Yeah, I mean, what a handful of terrific comments here, Araceli. So a couple of comments right off the bat. Yeah, when we talk about meditation, it's a catch-all term right now, right? It's a little bit like the word sport. Well, when you say sport, what are you talking about? There are hundreds of sports. And just like meditation, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of meditations. And so each one somewhat connected to the kind of neuroscience you're alluding to, each one of these meditations has a very specific bandwidth of applicability. And therefore, what I will be doing is pointing out that bandwidth of applicability, and also in a way that you're alluding to that really resonates with me is it's what my friend John Wellwood famously coined as spiritual bypassing. Thinking that, for instance, your meditation can handle everything. Well, yeah, maybe theoretically it has the capacity, but as you're alluding to, we are complex beings. We exist along a spectrum of identity. My term from beast to Buddha, from infrared to ultraviolet. And therefore, all these different meditations and also, excuse me, the contemplations, the psychology, the tools that I'll be implementing can really be targeted towards these specific aspects of our identity. And then we can go in this direction if you want. It's called neurophenomenology. How does this experience then relate to brain processes? I'm a deep devoted student to the neurosciences. I've been a rat lab. They put me on fMRIs and studied, my insanity. So I have a tremendous relationship with the whole neurosciences community, and I love this. It's a hot topic now, neuroplasticity and all that. So I bring this in. My approach is largely an integral, systemic, holistic approach. So as you mentioned at the outset, even though I abide by the Tibetan Buddhist principles, I also abide by the Zen adage, chase two rabbits, catch none. So I chase the Tibetan rabbit. But I also cast it, like I mentioned, a wide net. I draw on truth wherever I can get it. In this program, I'll actually be drawing on literature, the work of Camus. We'll be bringing in some philosophy, Wittgenstein, Heidegger, David Loy, the neuroscientists, Richie Davidson and the like, physicists to a certain point, because there's so much power when, I'm saying all this kind of almost spiritual rhetoric when I'm talking about all these vast applicabilities. But part of my charter is to act a little bit as a cultural translator, where I take these vast wisdom traditions, and by the way, Bardo principles are not just in Tibetan Buddhism. You'll find them in virtually any non-dualistic tradition. And part of my charter, as I retrospectively look at my work, is to act as a cultural translator. So how can we take these Bardo tenets that were derived from the ancient Eastern wisdom traditions and bring them into a Western milieu of really largely science and psychology, and also augmented by philosophy? And so to me, this is what brings it alive for me. It's like, whoa, Kant was talking about this. Schopenhauer said the same thing. Plato was alluding to this. How cool is that? And because we're talking about these kind of perennial, timeless topics, it's really eye-opening when you go, oh, I can see why psychology fits in here. I can see why physics fits in here. And so then what happens is you have this really vast, integral, systemic approach that, all these different lenses support each other. And that creates a kind of a snowball of wisdom, so to speak, that really, I think, will be a benefit. It will really stick.
Well, I mean, one of the things that somebody brought up to me was, oh, Bardos, you're going to be talking about the art of dying. And so, of course, that is, I would assume, the biggest Bardo of all.
That's the biggest Bardo. Yeah, exactly.
And one of the comments you made is, depending on how you've decided to live your life will decide on how you die.
Very much.
So I wanted you to expand on that.
Yes. What the great poet Kabir once said, what is found now is found then when it comes to death. You will die the way you live. And so I teach a lot on what I call graceful exit programs, which in fact is just what it sounds like. How can we actually make this transition into the Bardos gracefully? And we do it by, again, working with the death principle now. I mean, how do you do when you get the phone call from your doctor saying that you have a really damaging disease? Where does your mind and heart go then?
Yeah.
Where do you go when your lover dumps you? Where do you go when you get fired? How do you handle this kind of interruption? And Pema Chodron Rinpoche, who's a current teacher, often says beautifully, if we're armed with the right approach, rupture transforms into rapture. If we can relate to these interruptions in the fabric and the narrative of our being properly, these are eye-opening and radically transformative experiences. I mean, really think about it, Araceli. We don't grow when we're sitting fat and happy on sunshine on the beach drinking a margarita. Don't get me wrong. I love doing that, man.
Okay, I've yet to do that.
Yeah.
So.
I love drinking margaritas on the Yucatan. But is that really where growth takes place? No. Growth takes place when we're tested, challenged, thrown out of our comfort zone. I'll be talking a little bit about that, the kind of pedagogical approach I take. And therefore we can, when things do fall apart, my dear friend Pema Chodron, wrote this very best-selling book called When Things Fall Apart. That's a Bardo text. Where do you go when things fall apart? You don't have to just capitulate default into habitual patterns, i.e. karma, that are unhealthy. if you're armed properly with the doctrine and then the practices that implement that doctrine, you can use these ruptures in your life, in fact, to bring about rapturous states. And that's no small thing. I mean, think about how your life will change, that anytime things really, from an old perspective, just sent you into a kilter, now you can say, wow, you know, look at the new opportunities here. Look at how I can habituate in a new way, how I can default into wisdom instead of confusion. And so I think this is the great, I playfully refer to it, RSLE, as a kind of stealth help. There's more going on than meets the eye, you know. So we'll be talking about Bardo principles in one particular kind of bandwidth of applicability. And because it's a perennial, timeless kind of phenomena, you will then for yourself, this is where it gets cool, you then for yourself, you start to connect the dots. You start to see, oh, that helps me understand what happened here. Oh my goodness, that helped me understand what happened there. And so the next time things fall apart, which, you know, probably tomorrow, right?
Right.
The next time that rug gets pulled out, instead of, oh crap, you might go, oh wow. And then you can use that opportunity, that space, that openness. And this is where you mentioned briefly the practice of open awareness. This is kind of the genius meditation that we'll be exploring. This is a profoundly transformative practice that ties in, you know, the formal capacity we'll be doing, but it also ties into this one breath meditation. So that's a really powerful, big hitting practice that will allow us to take these teachings and then implement them into our lives. And that's important, because otherwise it's just philosophy, it's just rhetoric. No. We want to transform rhetoric into reality. And so all the contemplations, meditations that we'll be doing are in fact designed to do that. How can we bolt these truths right here, right now?
Well, one of the things that I also understand that you feel is that the bardos are considered, you feel they are considered really the greatest gifts of humanity, but you're also saying that this is not the only culture that has it.
This meaning the Tibetans for sure. Yeah, nobody
Yes.
has a patent on truth, right? You know, the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist, nobody has a patent on truth. And really, again, when you understand the basic phenomenology of the Bardo principle, again, you'll start to see it everywhere. It's just that for some reason, the Tibetans have really focused on this. They have a vast literature corpus, literally thanatology, that you know, what you do with your Art of Dying program at the Open Center is the study of thanatology. So Bardo principles, like I mentioned at the outset, are absolutely, totally targeted towards that transition. And there's a tremendous, you know, support framework around that. But we can derive these truths from any tradition. And again, that's why I cast this net, so people say, oh, this is what, you know, this is what this philosopher, this psychologist has to say. And then most importantly, whoa, boy, you'll find yourself nodding your head when you take a course like this, because it will explain your experience. It will put a kind of a supportive understanding of usually adverse, untoward circumstances that allow us to relate to them in a completely new way. And that's why I get so excited about sharing it, because it really can transform your life. I mean, it's really that powerful. And that's why I playfully argue the Bardo teachings are one of the greatest contributions given to humanity. Because if we can use these, you know, usually when we're in difficult situations, and studies have shown this, you know, that the tendency is not to open. The tendency is to contract defensively, to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Well, right now, look what's happening in the world. Is it really advantageous to put, you know, to fall back into the same trajectory? So if we can replace that contraction with openness, hence the practice of open awareness, we can then, first of all, see how contracted we are, see how that's an egoic defense structure, and then transform that into an opportunity to open. And so very, very, very instant, immediate application. You know, you're getting involved in a charged conversation with a partner, with a boss. These practices, and I will point this out, they will sensitize you towards contraction. They will actually sensitize you somatically. And this is where my anti-complaint meditation comes in. You will start to feel, these aren't just cognitive processes, these are visceral somatic processes. And you'll start to feel, oh, I'm starting to contract. I'm about to lose it. And with these meditations, hence I call some of these emergency meditations, you can apply these babies on the spot. And instead of saying something that will get you fired or get you dumped or whatever, you can say, wait a second, do I really need to say that? You know, you'll be able to replace reactivity with responsibility, the ability to respond because you're more open. You're not, you know, relating to situations from a defensive or offensive contracted stance. You're relating to situations with an open mind and heart. And so therefore, these wisdom teachings are really, you know, applied wisdom is compassion. You know, how you take these teachings and then they allow you to, first of all, act with compassion towards yourself and then towards the world, which right now could use a little bit of compassion, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the harder you are on yourself, I said to my friend, the harder you're going to be on everybody else, and no one else knows that.
Isn't it? Yeah, isn't it? We express towards others what we express towards ourselves. And
Yeah.
so we work with ourselves to better work with others.
So with the bardos and in general, let's look at the way that they psychologically affect us. For example, if you have someone who you feel is in great need of it, would they be able, like you would say, their mental state is unbalanced? Would they be able to take advantage of something like this?
Yes, they would. And really the challenge then becomes implementation. In other words, how can you communicate to this person to bring them benefit? And again, this ties into what I just said, because if you have the capacity to keep an open mind and heart, and again, practices like open awareness and the one breath meditation do that, you will realize that one of the highest forms of skillful means in Sanskrit is called upayas, is not meeting people where you're at. It's meeting people where they're at. That's real skillful means. And like, for instance, a classic example, let's take the culture war. Can people who listen to Fox News actually be open and receptive enough to talk to people who listen to MSNBC? You know, and with this type of practice, and I will give some very, one of the other meditations is what I call the mute meditation. And I'll give you very specific examples in the program where you can actually learn to, because you're so open to yourself, you can allow yourself to be open and receptive to others, even if they represent views that normally would be highly defensive, contracted from your own end, right? I mean, you talk to somebody from a different political party, a different stance, a different religion, almost always, unfortunately, the default mode network, literally the default mode system, is to contract. Well, that's where wars of words start. That's where literal wars start. And so now, armed with these skill sets, as I mentioned earlier, you'll feel that, you can interrupt that. That's the insertion of a bardo. See, you're recognizing a bardo. I don't have to go there. I don't have to say that. I can listen. And God forbid, I can love. I can learn actually how to love and understand and have compassion towards this other person. And so it really, it all starts, like you said, with ourselves, with our ability to stay open. We stay open to ourselves. That allows us to stay open to others, to stay open to the world. And then when we relate from that stance in a very powerful way, the world will always tell you what to do. The other person will always tell you what to do. In other words, if you're sensitive enough to what's happening, there's always a level of instruction taking place. We just have to tune into it. Usually what we do, we fall back into our habits of reactivity. Oh, I need to react this way. That's not always very helpful. You know, it may be comforting to the ego, because again, that's just what ego does. Because it has this kind of outdated operating system. So we've you know, these wisdom traditions upgrade this operating system so that we can maintain wonderfully confluent with the charter of open center altogether, right? I think it's beautiful to what you guys are doing. What are the implementation strategies for really being open? The Buddha, you know, one translation of his word etymologically is literally the opened one. The Buddha is the opened one. And that absolutely connects to these Bardo principles, because when you open, that's what you're opening to. You're opening to this kind of primordial space. Yeah, so yeah, it's again, just so many ways that once you make these teachings your own, again, that's my charter as a cultural translator. Once you understand in your vocabulary, your life, how the Bardo principle plays out, then you know from that stance. Then you can actually act from that stance. And the contemplations we'll be doing, like you mentioned, the unconditional happiness contemplation is absolutely integral to being open. How can you be happy under any circumstance?
Oh,
Well, you sure as heck ain't going to do that if you're closed. You have to be able to say yes. You have to be able to open and say yes to whatever arises. And this is where Araceli, it ties into end of life, classic kind of Bardo. You know, can you in fact have a mind and a heart that is so big, so accommodating, so receptive that you can say yes to unwanted experience? You can say yes to old age, yes to sickness, and even yes to death. The great spiritual masters can do that. And how did they get that way? Well, they worked with tenets like this. Simply did this kind of inner work. And when we open to that degree, we can, in fact, be like them, because we all, even though our storylines might be different, inherently, we're the same. It's like His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, you know, we all want to be happy. We all want to avoid suffering. We just do it in different ways, some of which are skillful and some of which are not. And so this is the other thing that I riff on a lot, Araceli, is this, what I now somewhat playfully refer to as this kind of psychological spiritual reductionism, in the best sense of that word, where that if you really look closely at the way mind and behavior plays out, it can be reduced to some fundamental psychological and spiritual tenets. And this is very helpful because the vast complexity that now consumes the world can be reduced to foundational principles. And so one of the things we talk about is, you know, wisdom itself is unbelievably simple. These principles of openness are, they're actually disarmingly simple. It's confusion that's complicated, right? So even now I'm pitching out all this stuff, and it just seems like it's another kind of philosophy or whatever, but this is where the meditations come in, that fundamentally these truths are brought about in really simple kind of revelations. And that's where the power comes from, is you know, the applicability, the profundity actually comes from this inherent simplicity. And that's a large part of what I'll be trying to convey during this course. So.
Well, it sounds like it's very, when you actually start the practice, and what it's sounding to me like is that as you start to learn each one, I am assuming you are actually feeling either the solace that it's adding to these fears and things that you're always going through. And that's one of the reasons that it will work, is because you're going to remember that. And you're going to go, because if it's not, then it's going to be a very hard convince line most of the time.
Yeah. Oh, that is such a terrific point. And in fact, it's so integral that at the outset of this program, and I do this really with everything I present now, is this kind of pedagogical approach that comes from a number of wisdom traditions, where we work fundamentally to embody these teachings, where we, you know, we start with the intellect, we start with the thinking mind, but fundamentally, in the true spirit of yoga, we want to download these teachings into our system. And so therefore, when we get into difficult situations, it's actually the body that responds. It's the wisdom of the body that responds. And I will talk a little bit in this course about maps of mind that actually kind of depict exactly what you're talking about, because then that empowers this trajectory from really the kind of doctrinal cognitive approach to the fully embodied approach. And where this becomes super helpful in very charged situations is that, again, in this gesture of real skillful means, sometimes the very most skillful thing to do or say is say nothing, do nothing. Just simply be in an environment with an open mind and heart. And in really charged situations, I work a lot in hospice. These are really, again, the archetypal, really intense environments. Your mere presence can be transformative. You don't have to say or do anything. In fact, just being silent and open is what transforms. So that's what we also point out is the power of silence, the power of openness, and how that can be vastly applicable in many situations. And however, when things do need to be done, then we can, you know, step into the world in a kind of spiritual activism and take these principles and apply them, you know, like get out into the streets and march right now, vote, do all these things. And so we play this dance between the kind of, I wouldn't say theoretical, it's only theoretical because we haven't experienced it yet, but meditations that are designed to open us on the spot. And then also very specific methods, means for taking this wisdom and again applying it. Because it's not just for us, you know, these teachings, they're not just targeted for us, they're fundamentally targeted for the benefit of others as well, as I was alluding to at the outset, that with this type of skill, this confidence, when you know how to deal with fear, we talk a lot about fear in this course, when you know how to deal with anxiety, when you can understand these unsettling, disquieting situations within yourself, then just like I mentioned earlier, the person across from you may have a different narrative, a different storyline, but fundamentally they're looking for very similar things. And if you understand that from this stance of openness, that brings about tolerance, accommodation, and then fundamentally kindness, love. You know, how can you really love? When you're open, the natural consequence of being open is being in love. When you're contracted, the contraction and love are antithetical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, when we're contracted, we're defensive and offensive. And so, in a very beautiful way, Bardo principles in the open awareness practice actually touches this. You will actually start to feel this in your heart center with this practice. You start to touch into, you know, kind of the affective component behind all this, which is this kind of unconditional love, being open to everything that arises within your own heart mind, and then by extension to that which happens to others. And so this is the, you know, then you step into the world fearlessly because you have the confidence born from this openness, and really love is a natural consequence of that. So yeah, it's got a lot of chops, you know, it has a lot of traction.
Well, I want to, this is going to sound a little going off, but it's not. I want to bring up the fact that you created a charitable foundation for
Yeah,
developing, basically for developing countries called Global Dental Relief, which
right,
is
right.
really, to tell you the truth, it's kind of unheard of. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because the idea of meditation is often criticized, and I don't know, it's basically by maybe just mainstream or even within the community of holistic, as maybe it's a feel-good practice, but it leaves others behind. It's
Right,
simply done for your own self-gratification and advancement, and
right.
that the act, but what happens is, and based on your work in Tibet, in Bhutan, and in all that area that you were learning what the true tenets of Buddhism were, the more you, I guess, develop, the more I feel like the act of compassion became grander in your life. And that this is how it grows, that it isn't something that it's just for us, that once we become more understanding of this, it's an automatic that it gets bigger and its
Beautifully said.
practices go out.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, and you know, kind of one technical way to say that is compassion is just applied wisdom, right?
Mhm.
And so, you know, for me, yeah, exactly what you said. I love this sort of work. I've spent, you know, at this point several years in these countries doing this sort of work, and it's just, it happens naturally. It happens spontaneously when you start to open to this degree. The the suffering of others becomes your own, and
Yeah.
you want to get rid of it. The suffering of others becomes your own. That's literally what compassion means, to suffer with. And so this is a beautiful consequence. I'm so glad you brought this up. That is, as the heart mind opens, you start to realize in this kind of deep ecological way that you are not separate from others, nor are you separate from this planet. I mean, you're inextricably connected to every other sentient being and everything in this earth. And so this is really important for spiritual practitioners to understand, is that yes, initially, provisionally, we do turn within because we have to kind of clean up at home first. And if we don't do that, then when we step forward, it's not response action, it's reactive. We're projecting, we're you know, imputing, we're throwing all our stuff onto others. And so we start within, we do our own homework, we kind of clean up, so to speak, using these meditations. But then fundamentally, your life becomes your meditation. And you know, Suzuki Roshi, the great Zen master, once said so beautifully, you know, he said, strictly speaking, there are no enlightened beings. There's only enlightened activity. And so the fruition of these types of practices is in fact this true egoless, selfless, enlightened activity where you don't even have to think about it. It's just a natural, spontaneous response to the needs of others in the world. Because really at this level, in a deep, profound way, you're no longer acting on behalf of yourself. You're acting on behalf of reality. You become, like Thich Nhat Hanh said, a servant of peace. You simply act as a representative of reality. And therefore, with this quality of openness, sensitivity, heightened awareness, you know what needs to be done because you're in tune with what's happening. You're so connected to what's happening in the world that you know exactly what needs to be done. And so this is really important for spiritual practitioners because otherwise, as you alluded to, it's so easy. There's so many of these spiritual traps, spiritual bypassing, spiritual materialism, cosmological dualism. There's all these subtle booby traps that I've been a meditation instructor for like 30 years. And in my own experience and teaching others, it's not a question of if, it's a matter of when you're going to get stuck in some of these traps. And so we're not going to spend a ton of time on the program unless it comes up, but it's really helpful to have it underneath, kind of sublimating everything, so that we realize, again, yes, we're doing it provisionally for ourselves, but fundamentally we're doing it for others. And so my work with GDR, Global Dental Relief, is just a kind of a natural expression of this kind of applied wisdom. To whatever extent I've embodied it, it just happens naturally. The suffering of others becomes your own, and you just want to get rid of it. You want to help.
This is very eye-opening for me because over the years I've heard a lot of explanations about, Buddhism is the path to enlightenment and to awakening. And I always thought that's very complicated for me to understand. It's too much of an intangible. I really don't get what you're saying. And and it's been around for 2,000 years. And somebody said there should be like 90% of the planet should be Buddhist
Right.
because this is the path to awakening. And I'm thinking, yeah, but I really don't understand what you're saying. With this conversation, what I'm really, really understanding is that the simplest, and again, that's another thing when people say the simplest is not simple, but
Simple doesn't mean easy. That's right.
right, it's not easy, but once you are doing it, this is actually, now I'm understanding something else here. We're always being taught about being in the third dimension, we're in poverty, we're in depression, we're all of this. But by doing this, we're actually doing this whole thing about going more into the spiritual realm and living in this dimension. And that is actually, I guess, a better way of existing because those fears and things start to slide away. We're much more empowered or in control of, I guess, a higher consciousness. And it's basically to do with these simple things that you just talked about, that the more you do these simple little practices, the bigger your life is going to become, the more you're going to attract that energy that, takes us to the bigger levels. We're able to be, I guess, much, much more conscious of how to help others, and it will just come to us.
That's
So,
absolutely right. Absolutely right. And really, when you get to this kind of point where fundamentally you realize there's no difference between the spiritual and the material. This is the cosmological dualism I was alluding to earlier, that most of us think. It's like Almas, the beautiful physicist, psychological spiritual practitioner. He said, when most people start out on the spiritual path, they're unwittingly setting out for heaven. They just want to get out because they associate matter, the world of form, with suffering. Spiritual is, set in opposition to the material. So I need to just FedEx out of this scene. Well, that's really partial limited view. What this degree of openness really, again, open is Bardo. When we're talking about open, we're talking about Bardo. When you open to this shattering realization that the spiritual is absolutely no different from the material. I mean, even in Gnostic tradition, the Gospel according to St. Thomas, the kingdom of the Father is spread out across the earth, but men, women do not see it. It's right here, right now. We only have to open our heart mind, open the aperture of our awareness, which is what Bardo principle does. And then you make this shattering discovery that it's always been here, it's right here, right now. I just need to open to it and realize it. Like T.S. Eliot, right?
Hmm.
Return as if for. So Bardo tenets, they literally, like you were alluding to, Arcel, is beautiful. They simply remove the cataracts of confusion. They allow the heart mind to open to such a degree, we realize, like why we don't open. That's the other thing that happens. And then we come to this staggering realization that the material is actually no different from the spiritual. It's already been here forever. It never will be anywhere else. We simply just have to open to it, and it's always already right here. So I playfully talk about it. There's so much common parlance jargon about the term waking up. It has provisional validity, but really, in my experience, it's more waking down into the truth of your body, waking down into the truth of materiality to discover that there is no materiality. That fundamentally, if you look at things in the proper lens, there is only spirit. There is only consciousness, heart, mind, whatever ineffable term you want to throw to that which cannot be named. And this is a game changer. This is a game changer. And Bardo principles, in fact, lead you to that opening. Once your eyes and heart, mind opens to this extent, the Bardo teachings will show you that everything you've been looking for is actually hiding in plain sight. It's always already right here and now. We just have to open to it. And Bardo teachings actually bring about that opening.
So just wrapping up a little bit, but
Sure.
with your students, how do you observe this when you have students that have been with you for a long time, when you're seeing the change?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's as different as the students are different, right? So people respond to this opening in various ways. It's actually why I wrote my first book, Power and Pain, exactly on this topic. That sometimes the opening, in fact, this is really worth saying, when the opening is experienced, the gap, the bardo is experienced and left alone, left without reference to self, left without reference to ego, that experience is actually quite ecstatic. It's just this great open orgasmic spiritual opening, this release. However, that if it's again misunderstood, and this is Bardo returns to Bardo principle altogether, if we don't leave that experience as it is, almost invariably, because the egoic narrative is still very much operative, it's still online, then what happens is sometimes the opening can become problematic. There can be a little bit of unsettling around that because the rupture has not turned to rapture because you don't have the view that allows it to be that. It's just left as rupture. And then what happens with people that aren't prepared or kind of aren't stable, that can bring about all sorts of overt and covert resistances. Some people will say, I can't do this, it's too difficult, it's too subtle, it's too advanced. There's all kinds of very interesting narratives that ego will throw up as a way to keep you away from the truth. So for me, it's been a fantastically illuminating experience, both for myself and watching students. Some take absolute delight in Tibetan, the word is dakini, the sky dancers. They love to dance in the gaps. They love to dance in space. And other people contract with a little bit of anxiety because there's too spacious. And so therefore, a little hand holding is in order sometimes, a little support is in order. But most of these issues can be completely handled if there's the proper philosophy, outlook, or right view. If you really simply understand Bardo principles, you understand how ego is anti-Bardo, then when the resistances come up and you have some kind of issues or problems around this, then there's a quality of understanding. And from my own experience, it's like, oh, I'm still contracting in this way. How interesting is that? Right? And so then you return yet again, you replace, oh crap, with, oh wow. Oh wow. Look, I'm still a schmuck. Oh wow, I'm still selfish. Oh wow. This is just the power of being so anti-Bardo and so anti-closed. And so instead of tying yourself into knots and getting so hard on yourself, you develop the sense of levity and lightness. Like, oh my God, I'm still such a jerk. But at least you're a little bit less of a jerk than you were before, right? And so then, this quality of kindness towards yourself develops, playfulness, levity. And then like we talked about earlier, we express towards others what we express towards ourselves. So I've seen, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen the entire display. And I've understood, and this is what informs my presentations these days, that if students are simply given the proper armamentarium, the proper skill sets, the meditations, the contemplations, the meditations, they can handle anything. Because this wisdom, again, this is inherent. This is not something that's juxtaposed, interposed, superimposed. The wisdom that's revealed with Bardo principles is inherent. It's actually part of the fabric of who we are. And so therefore, really, it's literally a process of discovery. It's literally a process, once you open, you discover all these adventitious defilements, these superimpositions, they fall away. And then this radiant simplicity stands out from underneath it. And then all these consequences arise. That's a beautiful thing. All these really elegant consequences arise from the actual experience of these foundational spaces. And that's what gets me so excited, because when people have it, you see it in their eyes, you see it in their being, you see that they're more open than they used to be. Their faces are more relaxed. Their whole demeanor has a little bit more shine, because when you open and relax, you become more transparent to yourself. And then the natural, whatever term you want to use, the light within, the divinity within, the goodness within, it just starts to shine. It just starts to radiate, because it's there all the time. It's just so closed down. And so when you open, then that light shines, and then you're actually warm and illuminate the world altogether. So it's really a delight for me to see. I just love it. It makes me inspired to just keep working, because when people wake up and open up, it's one of the most delightful things to witness, for sure.
Wow, that's like a lovely point to end this this talk on. And thank you so much, Andrew.
Most welcome for having me.
Yeah, I want to let people know on September 16th, which is the following Wednesday at 7 p.m., Andrew will be holding a free introductory evening. And then right after, a week later, you will have the class starts in 5 sessions. So please go to the Open Center at www.opencenter.org and check out Andrew's class. Thank you, Andrew. That was lovely.
Love it. Nice to spend time with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, we can keep talking. I have no idea where we are.
Okay.
We're still on. We're still on air. But well, anyway, we'll be coming, and perhaps we'll be also bringing you back on regarding lucid dreaming and dream yoga, which is other topics we look forward to hearing from you.
That would be fun. I'd appreciate that. So yeah, great questions. I enjoyed it.
All right.
Really fun time.
All right.
So ciao, everybody.
Bye.
Stay healthy, happy, and see you next time. Ciao.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Lori. Okay, we're good. Can you hear me, Lori? Hello? Are you there? Bye-bye.